Hi friends, welcome back to another episode of Generation Tech. My name is Alan. War is a terrible thing. Now I personally don't have any experience with it, but I did just recently get involved in a fight with an old woman at my local grocery store for the last pack of triple-ply toilet paper. Nothing will get in between me and the luxurious softness my bottom deserves. No, but seriously, like in war, the toilet paper riots is an environment where there is no law, no regulation, no morality. It's the ultimate fight for survival. Now, organizations like the Jedi Order have tons of different rules to keep their followers in check. Many of these rules were ethically based and severely limited a Jedi's ability to function in a more dangerous situation like, let's say, a toilet paper riot. Which is why the Jedi Code immediately began falling apart the second the Jedi entered the Clone Wars. Today we're going to be looking at 8 different times when the Jedi committed war crimes during the Clone Wars. Now obviously not every one of these examples you're going to agree with, so comment in the section below what you think of each one. On a battlefield, there's nothing more universally sacred than the truce flag. For all combatants, no matter their culture, the white flag raised over your head symbolizes that you wish to talk and perhaps find a peaceful end to hostilities. This is not a rule you'll want to screw with because you'll never know when your life depends on it. You're not supposed to shoot someone with a white flag, and they in turn are not supposed to use the pause in combat to their own advantage, which is exactly what Obi-Wan Kenobi does during the Battle of Christophsis. With his forces almost completely overrun, Obi-Wan Kenobi manages to halt an entire Separatist armored column by asking for a truce and offering his surrender to Separatist General Lothsam. Lothsam, as any general, would agree to hear Obi-Wan Kenobi out and negotiate terms for surrender. They sit down together, enjoy a nice talk, but it becomes pretty obvious immediately that Obi-Wan has no intention to surrender and is just buying enough time for Anakin Skywalker and Ahsoka Tano to sneak behind Separatist lines and destroy a shield generator that is protecting their armored vehicles from Republic artillery. When the two Jedi set off their explosives, Obi-Wan Kenobi jumps into action and arrests General Lothsam. This is a completely unacceptable use of a truce flag. It's completely reasonable for the Separatist droid army now to ignore any future attempts by the Republic military to surrender. Anakin Skywalker during the Battle of Ryloth also completely abused the use of the truce flag. After his fleet was unable to breach a Separatist blockade, he offered him and his crew and his Venator-class Star Destroyer as prisoners to the Confederacy in exchange for allowing relief supplies to reach the Twi'lek people on the surface of the planet. But instead of surrendering, Anakin rams his Star Destroyer directly into the blockade fleet's command ship. Now, in our world, there's no such thing as the Force, so unfortunately, we can't really go around reading the minds of our prisoners. Most developed countries in the world have developed guidelines for what kind of methods are acceptable when it comes to extracting information. Torture, both physically and mentally, is deeply frowned upon by the international community. Now in Star Wars, there have been plenty of Sith Lords who have used their powers to interrogate individuals and essentially strip their minds of information. This can be an extremely personal, terrifying, painful, and intrusive method. But it's not a force skill that only the Sith are allowed to use. The Jedi for quite some time also rely on this enhanced interrogation method, and it's pretty terrifying to see in action. When Cad Bane was arrested by the Jedi Order for stealing a holocron, Mace Windu, Obi-Wan Kenobi, and Anakin combined their force powers together in order to gather information from the Duros' mind. This definitely is bordering unethical interrogation and probably would be considered a war crime by many different factions. In the last year of the war, a terrible bombing took place in the Jedi Temple hangar, killing several Jedi and also dozens of civilians. While the Jedi were deputized as military leaders during the Clone Wars, the Jedi Order was officially not supposed to be a part of the military. They were considered a civilian organization, therefore the Jedi Temple is considered a civilian target. The bombing was rightly called a terrorist attack by Republic officials, but surprisingly, the attack was actually carried out by Jedi Padawan Barriss Offee in protest over the Jedi's responsibility for the war, making this a political attack. Although Barriss Offee's actions are not supported by the Jedi, this does show us how troubled some of their members were and how quickly they could fall into extremism. As we learn more about the human mind, we also learn how important child development is to an individual's overall growth and personality. We as a society have become more and more protective over our children, and for good reason. The international community strongly condemns the use of underage combatants in any type of conflict. Unfortunately, the Jedi never got that memo, whether it's bringing 9-year-old Anakin Skywalker to a war zone on Naboo, or letting a teenager like Ahsoka Tano lead a squadron of fighters into a battle, or deploying the young Padawan Knox on a mission he clearly was not ready to handle. The Jedi Order was constantly exposing people far too young to battle, oftentimes sending them to their deaths. When a lawful combatant surrenders, there are minimal standards of treatment that individuals are supposed to receive, including not being exposed to torture and death. The Jedi Order were technically supposed to not kill surrendered combatants, and they generally did not. But when it came to the Sith, they were far less hesitant to break that rule, despite the fact that members of the Sith Order were also sentient beings. Anakin cuts off Count Dooku's head, even though he doesn't have hands anymore and can't possibly pose a threat to anyone at this point. He's clearly a surrendered combatant. Mace Windu also almost executes Chancellor Palpatine after he surrenders as well. The Jedi's unhealthy obsession with the Sith make them break their own principles, along with the most basic rules of warfare. By the third year of the war, the Jedi Council was contacted by Onderani and rebel fighters who were fighting against the legitimate government of their planet. That government also happened to be supporting the Separatist Alliance cause. Technically speaking, the Jedi were not supposed to intervene in local disputes such as this, but the Jedi are convinced by Anakin Skywalker and other more strong-headed members of the High Council to send advisors to go help train and organize their militia. The whole operation is seen as a minimal investment that could yield great returns. The Jedi Advisor Team teaches the Onderani and rebel fighters the basics in asymmetric warfare, including how to carry out psychological warfare against the pro-separatist regime. The Onderani and rebels ultimately are successful with their mission, but their leader Saw Gerrera would take the lessons he had learned from the Jedi to turn his organization into a hardened militia, which was accused of carrying out several terror attacks during the Galactic Empire era. The Grand Army of the Republic was made up of primarily clone soldiers who were essentially slaves created to serve the Republic. There are several different debates on several different issues regarding the use of a clone army. For instance, all clones are humans, therefore they should technically be protected under the Galactic Republic Constitution from forced servitude. When the Jedi were serving alongside the Judicials before the Clone Wars started, one of their main tasks was actually to prevent slave trafficking in the Outer Rim. Then there's the complete lack of empathy that the Jedi seem to display when it comes to understanding the plight of the clone soldiers they led into battle. What happened to a clone, for instance, if they were too injured to continue fighting? What happens to a clone when they become too old? Is there a retirement fund waiting for them? Was there even any infrastructure in place to help these clone troopers to transition to normal civilian life after the war? What if a clone trooper wanted to leave the Grand Army of the Republic and pursue another life free from killing and death? Well, most Jedi followed the Republic military guidelines and, more importantly, the Jedi Council, which told their followers to create an emotional distance from the men they led into combat. So when we consider every terrible thing that has been done to these clones throughout the entire war, we must also understand that the Jedi were complicit in the exploitation of these clone slaves. They were basically the guards in their prison camp. And just like we punish military leaders here on Earth for using child combatants in battle, we should also punish the Jedi for using slaves in battle as well. On Earth, there are several different types of weapons that are actually outlawed by the international community. Well, at least most of the international community. This includes the use of non-metallic landmines, flamethrowers against personnel, cluster bombs, chemical weapons, and of course the Hoth for psychological warfare. It's the result of our world agreeing that some weapons are way too cruel and dangerous to be used on our fellow man. The Star Wars galaxy should be 10 times more advanced and enlightened than we are, and I would expect to see some similar bans on the more gruesome weapons of war. The entire point of a lightsaber, for instance, is that it's a defensive weapon and a part of the Jedi ideology of peace. But Jedi generals throughout the war used some pretty crazy and dangerous weapons. Ki-Adi-Mundi ordered his troops during the Second Battle of Geonosis to use flamethrowers against the Geonosian hive nurseries. Whereas during the Battle of Malastare, the Jedi approved the use of a massive EMP pulse weapon that awoke an ancient beast buried several hundred feet beneath the ground. Then there's the Republic's targeting of Neimoidian hatcheries during the Battle of Cato Neimoidia. Now, it is not our duty to judge the Jedi as individuals. War is a chaotic and very confusing thing. It's very hard to understand why individuals act the way they do during conflict. But it is our duty to judge the Jedi's actions and hold them up to the standards of galactic law. So guys, I hope you learned something from this video. I think one of the most important lessons that I learned is that no one is infallible when it comes to being involved in war and conflict. It basically corrupts everything around it because it's such an unnatural and dangerous state to be living in. Well guys, I hope you enjoyed today's episode. Don't forget to subscribe and hit that notification button so you don't miss out on the rest of our awesome content. Leave any comments down below again if you agree or disagree with these so-called war crimes that I have accused the Jedi Order of. Anyway, thanks for joining us today. If you're watching this, you are Generation Tech.